Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim Hoadley. I'm the Associate Director of the Center for International Business Education and Research at Georgia Tech. I am a board member of JapanFest, and I am the co-chair of the Programs Committee for the Japan American Society of Georgia. Very glad to have you with us. So, the question that we're trying to answer today is, how does a foreign business become successful in Japan? Japan is one of the world's wealthiest countries. The Japanese have significant free cash, and their population of 127 million is 40% of the U.S. population squeezed into an area smaller than the state of California. It's a highly desirable place to do business, yet many foreign companies have failed in Japan, not for a lack of trying, but for a lack of understanding. But foreign companies can succeed in Japan. What follows are 3 stories of foreign business concerns who succeeded. How these companies succeeded may not be duplicable, but the methods they use can provide inspiration to future companies which desire to become big in Japan. Japan is not a Christian country. Even today, the percentage of the population that identifies as Christian is less than 2%. As a result, there are no old Christmas traditions in Japan. This is not to say that there are no Christmas traditions in Japan at all, though. The holiday has gained in popularity, if not in a religious way, then in a secular one. Among the most cherished Christmas traditions is one from an entrepreneur, and it's based on a lie. In 1970, Osaka hosted an international exposition. There were 77 nations represented, and since it was the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union were dueling to see who could put on the most impressive show. The Soviets boasted the tallest pavilion at the expo, with a towering spire topped with a red hammer and sickle. The US pavilion was also filled with spacecraft and lunar rocks collected the previous year. In the food court, they were also lining up. They were there for a brand new American food, Kentucky Fried Chicken. The lines created enthusiasm about the potential market, but when the first store opened in Osaka, things didn't go quite so well. People who had lined up for chicken at the expo did not come to the Osaka store. It looked like the market entry might fail. But Takeshi Okawara, the manager of the Osaka franchise, was resourceful, and he wasn't above a little bit of lying. He had been raised a Catholic, and so he was connected to the local Catholic school. The nuns invited him to provide a special Christmas feast for the students, and Okawara went all out. He got a Santa outfit, and he sang and danced for the children. He was a huge hit. And since he had studied at Harvard, he was kind of an expert on all things from the exotic land of America. People asked him, "Is this an authentic American Christmas tradition?" Sensing an opportunity, he lied. He told them, yes, everyone in America eats fried chicken for Christmas. He knew it was a lie, but since there was no Christmas tradition in Japan, he was hoping it would catch on. And it did. Another thing that helped? Santa is a white-haired white guy with a beard. You know who else is a white-haired white guy with a beard? Harlan Sanders, the founder of KFC. In Osaka, it is common to place commercial statues in front of stores as a way to attract attention and bring in customers. In Japan, most KFC stores have a life-size plastic statue of Harlan Sanders outside as a way to draw attention. Colonel Sanders serves as the store's mascot. And at Christmas time every year, every KFC in Japan puts a Santa costume on the statue of Colonel Sanders. Now, every year, 3.6 million Japanese families order Christmas dinner from KFC. A KFC Christmas bucket doesn't just have chicken. They often have an elegant chocolate cake, non-alcoholic champagne, and other delicacies. The buckets cost between $30 and $60 for a family of 4, and the revenue from Christmas buckets accounts for 1/3 of KFC's Japan's annual revenue. all because Takeshi Okawara told a white lie and helped create a new tradition in Japan. John Amos also visited the 1970 Osaka Expo. 15 years earlier, he and his brothers had founded the company that would become Aflac in Columbus, Georgia. He was impressed by the natural tendency of Japanese people to wear face masks. He was told that the Japanese wore them to avoid catching colds. Anyone who wears a mask to prevent catching a cold, he thought, will buy insurance, especially the type of insurance that Aflac specialized in, cancer insurance. Japan was a ripe market for cancer insurance in 1970. The rapid reindustrialization after the war, together with widespread smoking and an increasingly unhealthy diet combined with lengthening lifespans, meant that Japan was a place with a growing incidence of cancer. There was a challenge, though, in the Japanese market for Aflac, as well as an opportunity. The opportunity was that since there were no companies in Japan providing supplemental cancer insurance, Aflac had the market to themselves. Sure, Japan has national health care to pay for direct treatments, but there are no companies that sold policies to cover things not covered by health insurance. This was in part because most cancer patients in the 1970s were not told that they had the disease. The Japanese traditionally don't want to take time off from work and will often work through ailments that would fell the most work-devoted American. The Japanese ideal for death is to die quickly and in a manner that inconveniences others the least. Cancer, of course, is often the opposite of that. So Japanese companies didn't want to sell the policies because it meant potentially having indelicate conversations. According to a 1992 survey, 87% of Japanese doctors would not tell their patients if they had a cancer diagnosis. Emperor Hirohito, who died in 1989 of cancer, was never directly informed of his illness. In 1974, when Aflac was first licensed to sell its supplemental cancer insurance policies in Japan, it was the only company that did so. It retained this market monopoly until 1981, and even today, 50% of the cancer insurance policies in Japan are sold by Aflac. Japan's attitude towards cancer seems to be changing significantly, though. The stigma attached to the disease is much lower than it was back in the 1970s. The emeritus emperor Akihito, who stepped down last year, has been fairly open about his battles with prostate cancer. Today, the majority of patients with cancer in Japan are told by their doctors, so that they may take an active role in the fight against the disease and hopefully their recovery. The Japanese eat a lot of fish. Peak consumption corresponded with the peak of the bubble economy in the late 1980s, but even today the Japanese eat more than twice the global average. The most famous fish-centric dish has to be sushi. A trip to the sushi restaurant, while only a once-a-month treat for the average Japanese, brings out a dizzying array of fish. Tuna, squid, eel, octopus, mackerel, fish eggs, urchin, sardine, just about anything that swims in the sea is made into sushi. Even fugu, the puffer fish that contains a lethal neurotoxin, is eaten by those with deep wallets and a hunger for danger. What is not traditionally eaten in Japan as sushi is one of the most common and prized fish in the sea, salmon. Prior to the 1990s, salmon was not held in high regard in Japan. Japanese salmon, because of the location of Japan, grow up in warm waters, which means the meat is lean and often contains parasites. The only thing that can be done to salmon under those conditions of native Japanese salmon is to cook it or cure it in salt to kill the parasites. Because of this, it was treated as a garbage fish. It was never included in sushi. In Norway, during the 1960s and 70s, entrepreneurs were having success in farming salmon. So successful, in fact, that there was a surplus. So Norwegian representatives spread out across the world looking for new markets to expand sales. In 1974, Thor Listau, a member of the Norwegian Fisheries Committee, arrived in Japan and was surprised to see the low quality of salmon being consumed there. He felt that Japan presented an ideal target market for Norwegian salmon. In the 1970s, Japan produced enough fish to meet its own needs, so importation was unnecessary. But a growing, prosperous population led to overfishing and in 1980 the Japanese market was opened up. In the first several years, Norwegian salmon was treated in the Japanese market just like Japanese salmon. It was grilled or salt cured. But in 1986, Thor Listau returned to Japan, this time with a group of people tasked with working on Project Japan. Among the members of the group was Japan marketing expert Bjorn Erik Olsen. Bjorn's interest in Japan started in 1977 when he began studying Aikido in Norway. When he arrived with the group in 1986, however, they found that Norwegian ambassador Håkon Freyhaug had been having Norwegian salmon sushi served at the embassy, and that they had received positive feedback from the Japanese guests who had tried it. Norwegian salmon was quite fatty, a feature that Japanese consumers preferred in other fish like tuna. Olsen had his work cut out for him. He did not want to take the approach of saying, our salmon doesn't have parasites, because that reminds potential consumers that the salmon often contains parasites. He tried appealing to Japanese sensibilities by having a mascot designed for Norwegian salmon. The little Viking was cute, but it didn't sell a lot of fish. When importers and wholesalers seemed to be a non-viable way to enter the Japanese market, they gave a myriad of excuses. They said the fish was the wrong color, the wrong smell, the wrong head shape. They needed to find a new way to generate demand. They looked to chefs to give gravitas to the concept of eating salmon raw. They even went to cooking royalty, asking Iron Chef French Ishinabe Yutaka to rep for them. Iron Chef French sang the praises of the high-fat content as well as the softness and depth of flavor of Norwegian salmon. This helped the Norwegian salmon make some advances in the market, but still demand was concentrated in certain market segments. It was not a wide-scale hit. Norwegian salmon producer Leroy began growing salmon specifically optimized for the Japanese market. It was grown in the region of Troms and Finnmark in the far north of Norway, where the waters are very cold and clean, producing salmon with a very high fat content. The supply chains were optimized so that the fresh Norwegian salmon made it from the waters of Troms and Finnmark to Japanese customers in less than a day and a half. What finally turned the tide, though, came one day when Bjorn got Nichire Foods, one of the largest food distributors in Japan, to agree to buy 5,000 tons of Norwegian salmon, but on the condition that they could only sell it for sushi, not to be grilled or salt cured. Once Nichire was carrying it, salmon began appearing across the country. First, because it was cheap, in conveyor belt sushi restaurants. Salmon's mild flavor and the high fat content made it a hit with Japanese kids almost immediately. Adult restaurants took longer, but as more and more consumers came in and asked for it, many of the higher-end restaurants began serving it. It took more than a decade of concerted effort by a highly qualified team and a cost of almost $4 million, but the bet has paid off. Today, salmon is the most consumed type of sushi in Japan, and Norwegians were able to take that knowledge from the Japanese experience and apply it in similar initiatives in other Asian countries. Norway's salmon exports are more than 4 times greater than they were before Project Japan started. So what are the takeaways from these stories? First, it is always helpful to have someone on the inside. The state of Georgia has an official representative in Tokyo who is Japanese and will help Georgian companies that are trying to enter the Japanese market. Other states have representatives as well. There are additional resources, public and private, which can help you enter the Japanese market and find your inside person. Second, practice cultural arbitrage. Some cultures have tremendous untapped opportunities because the local culture makes a product or service unpalatable, even if there's no legal barriers to offering that. Finding these kinds of opportunities are ideal because you often can work in the market segment without competition. And finally, play the long game. Japan is well known and has a highly developed culture and economy. Every so often there are overnight successes in Japan, but those are by far the exception. The companies which succeed are overwhelmingly those who commit to the Japanese market, learn its complexities, and devote the necessary time and resources. If you follow these rules, the chances of success are high and the rewards are great. I hope that someday soon we'll be talking about your firm as the latest Big in Japan.
So, what is the
Okay.
best way for someone to break into working for one of these companies that have been successful in Japan?
Working for those companies in Japan is what I assume what Dwayne is asking. Is that correct?
Or is that, or
Yes.
working for Kentucky Fried Chicken in Japan, or Aflac in Japan, or this Norwegian company in Japan, or similar companies that are successful in Japan?
Well, I would say, like, if you look at the story, of course, at the stories that we covered, the only person who was working for a foreign entity in Japan was the Norwegian guy, Bjorn, and he had gone to Japan and learned the Japanese language and learned about Japanese culture living in Japan for several years. He also happened to kind of be in the right place at the right time. I think that if you want to work for a foreign entity overseas now, there used to be a very strong expat culture that companies would kind of view the world as they were sending out their middle level executives to go out and have an adventure and that sort of thing. There's been in the last 20 years a very strong movement away from that. About 10 years ago, when things were bad, IBM offered to its employees the opportunity. They could either be made redundant, they could be laid off, or they could work for one of IBM's overseas affiliates in places like India or something like that. But the challenge, or the asterisk on that, was that you had to work at the pay structure for natives of that location. They would sponsor your visa and such, but you would have to work there as a native, at the native pay scale. I think if you want to work in Japan and you want to work for a foreign entity, I think the first thing to do is to get to Japan, because I think they're going to be hiring. I knew many people when I lived in Japan who worked for foreign owned entities, and they were hired locally. In fact, one of my friends wound up becoming well, now he's back in New York. He's not working for Morgan Stanley anymore, but he got hired at Morgan Stanley mostly because he knew computers, and he was in Japan. And now he's not doing anything with computers. He's actually a financial trader and has a much nicer house and car than I do.
So, Jim, on the flip side, so in your own personal experience, or experience from other people that you may know, what types of business have not take on in Japan? Maybe it's too risky to get into that market, or what are some of the companies that you see struggling the most going to the Japanese culture?
That's actually kind of three different questions, because the first question is there any type of business that I see not succeeding in Japan? That's really hard for me to think of a type that would not succeed. I can give you a great example of a company that has a whole lot of money and has lost a whole lot of money in Japan, and that's Walmart. Walmart acquired the flagging Seibu, uh, or Seiyu, which, sorry, it's all part of the Seibu group, but they acquired a grocery chain owned by the Seibu group with the intention to make it over in uh, Walmart's image. Walmart's whole success is running these super lean supply chains. And the problem with that was that they didn't consider that in Japan, running a super lean supply chain like you run in the US is really, really difficult. There's not a lot of space to build the huge Walmart, centers that you see sometimes when you're driving on the interstate, that you'll just come over a hill and there will be hundreds of Walmart trucks there. So that's an issue. There's issues with, Walmart tends to approach the supply chain like a military operation, that it's get stuff there, get it in bulk. But Japanese consumers are much more concerned about things like freshness, and they're willing to pay more than if they can get something fresh. There's also the issue of that the competitive landscape is very well structured in Japan. One of the things that hurt Walmart was that they continued on their everyday low prices mantra in Japan, and the challenge there was that they would tell, if you can bring in a printed ad with somebody's price, we will match that price. I don't know if they still do that in the US. I think they do, actually. But in Japan, the challenge with that was basically all of the competitors. I don't think they got together and collaborated. I think that it they just knew how to do it. Basically, they put out flyers, as they have always done, weekly flyers with one loss leader in there. And what would happen is there was a group of Japanese consumers who would just collect all of these flyers, find all of these things that were being sold at a loss, go to the Walmart owned store and say, okay, here's all my flyers, sell me that. Well, they lost in the first 5 years, they lost $6 billion on the Seiyu investment. And last I heard, although I haven't checked in the last 6 months, they were trying to sell it and to get out. So if you don't do your homework, if you approach Japan as if it's that inside every Japanese person, there's an American waiting to come out. If you follow these things, you will not be successful. If you adjust to the local context, then you have the possibility to be very successful. But Japanese consumers are very discerning. They're very they're very. If you get brand loyalty, they'll be pretty loyal. But earning that brand loyalty and keeping that brand loyalty, it's very much a two-way street. There's a lot of expectations of service. Even in things like fast fashion, Uniqlo. If you compare a Uniqlo store to an American equivalent like Old Navy, you'll find that the Uniqlo store in Japan, everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. All the clothes are folded. There isn't anything sorted in the wrong place. When I go to an Old Navy store, it's like hunting through a bargain bin. And I don't know how. I can't find sizes. There's nobody there to help me. And Uniqlo is fast fashion, so they're not selling a high margin product, but you're still getting this high level of service.
So where Walmart went wrong, where did Costco or Costco go right in Japan?
Well, Costco's first trip to Japan was actually unsuccessful. So they opened a few test stores, they failed, they exited, and then they returned again. And part of what Costco did that was successful was in that initial opening, they were kind of softening up the market to the idea of a Costco approach. I haven't actually been in a Costco store in Japan, so I don't. Come to think of it, I'm not sure I've been in a Costco in America either. But I have been in discount clubs, just not Costco. But I'm going to guess that inside Costco in Japan, it's probably cleaner, neater, easier to find stuff. Although then you're going to come back to me and you're going to say, well, what about Don Quixote? That place looks like, it exploded. And whenever I go into Don Quixote, the first thought that I have when I get in one is, I really hope we don't have an earthquake right now, because if there's an earthquake, I will be buried under 17 layers of super cheap potato chips and other cheap plastic things. So I don't, Don Quixote is a great counter example. But so yeah, I don't know exactly what Costco has done that has allowed them to succeed, and that has not carried over to Walmart. I'm going to have to do some research on that. Unfortunately, I can't answer that question today.
No. Well, going back to food, since you talk about potato chips, another, I guess, very successful Japanese, American company that have gone to the Japanese market, of course, is McDonald's, right? So maybe you can talk about a little bit about that, how they've adapted to the Japanese palate. They even changed their menu items. And then what other American, maybe fast food or non-fast food companies in the food industry you think may have a good shot at being successful in Japan moving forward?
Well, there's a whole subgenre that you can follow for fast food, particularly American fast food in Japan, because McDonald's has been so successful, and both Wendy's and Burger King, Japan has just been a never-ending, line of tears for them, because they've gone, they've failed, they've come back, they've tried, they've exited, they've re-entered. Both Wendy's and Burger King are there now. There's certainly a segment of the population in Japan that prefers the competitors, but is it enough of a market given that fast food in Japan overall is shrinking as a level of consumption as the population ages? The big thing for McDonald's was that they were able to get in there. They were there first, and they followed a globalization model. That's a term that we use that combines the word global and localization. So you have Coca-Cola has followed very much the same model in Japan as well. There's another company that's done really well in Japan, and it means that you have a certain core of iconic brands because you can get a Big Mac in a McDonald's in Japan, although it will probably be better than a Big Mac that you would get at your typical American McDonald's. It will actually look like the picture. So they have those things. They have a quarter, the quarter pounder, etc. But they also have things like teriyaki burgers, and they have things like they come out with specialty items. They're
And
very
even
good.
seasonal food items, right? Like
That
skimi
was
baga and all those.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Yes. That's kind of the one thing that they have adopted that, in America, you have some acknowledgement at McDonald's of the seasons, not much. I mean, like what, the Shamrock Shake, and that's not even consistent, which
McRib, or I don't know if that's even
yeah,
seasonal, but
McRib's not seasonal. It's just, it's for a limited time only. But yeah, the Shamrock Shake is the only one that I can think of that has a time of year component attached to it. Wish I had a Shamrock Shake now. And, but they don't follow the seasons. And whereas, as you point out, that Skimi, the moon viewing burger in Japan, it's only offered in September when people are going out and having moon viewing parties. They have, in the spring, they have things that are Sakura themed around Sakura time. They come out every year in Japan. In the market, they produce over 25,000 new food items are introduced into the retail supply chain, and of those things, very, very few continue to exist. But McDonald's has been out there; they've been experimenting. Burger King is more trying to play off of its U.S. image. It's trying to be more American. And of course, there's also indigenous competition in fast food as well. And then, of course, the question is Burger King even an American firm? It was owned by the British at one time, and now it's owned by a fund that is centered in Brazil. So.
Well, Professor Hoadley, we do only have a few minutes left, so we have one final question, and then last question from my end. We'll think about Chick-fil-A. I think Lena talked about it might do well in Japan, so something to think about for next time. But Dwayne asks, would you say American financial companies, have they gained more of a presence or less of a presence in Japan over the last 5 to 10 years? And then to close us out, would you be able to kind of maybe give us some advice if companies, whether they're large or entrepreneurial and just kind of startups, how they can do well in Japan, and then how people can contact you and Georgia Tech Cyber?
Well, thanks. I would first say to Lena, short answer, yes, I agree. I think Chick-fil-A would do really well in Japan. I think it would fit with the domestic model, and they should hire me to consult to introduce them in Japan. Dwayne's question. So financial companies that have gained more of a presence or less of a presence in Japan. The American financial companies are looking for high growth markets. So they've been there, and they have been acquiring distressed assets in the financial market but that was more of the early 2000s that they were doing that. There hasn't been a whole lot of high profile acquisition or expansion in the financial markets in Japan. You haven't seen anything like Shinsei Bank or something like that, or Tokyo Star Bank, for example. And also worth noting is that the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s acquisitions were generally focused around distressed assets, and there's just not as many financial companies left that haven't been merged into something else or haven't been acquired by somebody else. So you don't see those American financial companies. Also, the American financial companies, I think, are very busy at home and in other markets as well. So to wrap that up, we've been talking about, because of brand recognition and name recognition, we've been talking about big firms that have made it big in Japan. KFC, big company. The nation of Norway, big. Aflac, big. But small companies, I think, have a great opportunity to enter the Japanese market. The challenge for small companies is the length of time and the ability to find partners in Japan. They're there, but right now the landscape in Japan is such that small and medium-sized businesses are not in a strong financial shape either. And just making a connection, there kind of has to be some sort of, when there's a small firm that makes it in Japan, there's usually some sort of connection of that there's somebody who is really who is, maybe it's a family-owned business, and someone in the family is very interested in Japanese culture, and it becomes a family-related thing. But I wish that more foreign firms would look, more small and medium-sized firms would look at doing business in Japan, because once you figure it out, there is a tremendous opportunity there. And I don't think it's so high on everybody's radar right now, and you can use that to your advantage. So that would be my recommendation. You can look, so I'm supposed to give our tagline. You can go to Cyber, CIBER Center. It's an acronym. It's not CYBER, CIBER.GATECH.edu to find out what we're doing. We're not focused just on Japan. We focus on, of course, the entire world. And others that you might want to contact as well: the Georgia Department of Economic Development, the U.S. Export Assistance Center, which has an office here in Atlanta as well. Those are great places to start. Or you can just go ahead and reach out to me, and I will be happy to both give you my advice and as well to connect you with others who can help you if you're looking to become big in Japan.
Great. Thanks so much, Professor Hoadley. And then don't forget to also reach out to the Japan American Society of Georgia and the Japanese Chamber of Commerce of Georgia, as many of our members are in the Japanese market. But thank you again, everyone. Thank you to Professor Hoadley. See you at our next event. Take care. Bye-bye.